The street lights flickered on as dusk settled over the quiet neighborhood. James pulled his blue sedan into the corner gas station, the tank needle hovering dangerously close to empty. He hadn't planned on stopping, but his day at the Veterans Center had run longer than expected. A young Marine had broken down during group session, triggering memories that hit too close to home for many of the vets. James had stayed behind, talking with the young man until the shaking in his hands stopped. Now all James wanted was to fill his tank and get home to his small but comfortable apartment where a hot shower and leftover stir-fry waited. He stepped out of his car, the cool evening air a welcome relief after the stuffy meeting room. The gas station was relatively quiet for a Friday evening, just an elderly couple paying inside and a teenager scrolling through his phone while his car filled up. James inserted his credit card and selected regular unleaded. As the pump hummed to life, he rolled his shoulders, trying to release the tension that had built up during the day. At 35, his body still maintained the disciplined physique from his Army Ranger days, though the occasional twinge in his left knee reminded him of the roadside bomb that had cut his third tour short. He didn't notice the sound of motorcycle engines at first. The rumble blended with the background noise of passing traffic and the tinny pop music playing through the gas station speakers. It wasn't until 3 bikes pulled into the station, deliberately circling around the pumps before parking near the air machine, that James's instincts kicked in. Something about their formation and the way they surveyed the station sent a familiar tingle up his spine, the same feeling he'd had on patrol when something wasn't right. He kept his movements casual as he watched them from the corner of his eye. 3 men, all wearing leather vests with some kind of insignia he couldn't make out. They weren't stopping for gas or going into the convenience store. James had seen enough trouble to recognize when it was brewing. He'd grown up in a rough neighborhood before the Army gave him structure and purpose. As a black man who'd faced his share of hostility both at home and abroad, he'd developed a sixth sense for danger. The nozzle clicked, signaling his tank was full. James replaced it and closed his gas cap, debating whether to get back in his car and leave or head inside to buy a bottle of water. First one out. He locked his car and walked toward the store, aware that the bikers had shifted their attention to him. The fluorescent lights inside the store were harsh after the dimming evening outside. James nodded to the cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes who barely looked up from her magazine. He grabbed a bottle of water from the refrigerated section and some beef jerky, his guilty pleasure since his Army days when protein was precious during long missions. As he paid, he glanced through the window and saw the 3 bikers had moved closer to his car. One was examining it with too much interest, running a gloved hand along the trunk. The other 2 were positioning themselves with clear sightlines to both the store entrance and the street. James pocketed his change and thanked the cashier. He took a deep breath, assessing his options. He could ask the cashier to call the police, but for what? The bikers hadn't done anything yet. He could wait inside until they left, but something told him they were waiting for him specifically. Years of training had taught him to trust his instincts. Right now, those instincts were telling him that stepping outside would lead to a confrontation, but avoiding conflict wasn't always the right answer either. He twisted the cap off his water and took a long drink, buying himself time to think. Through the window, he saw the largest of the 3 men motion to the others. They were getting impatient. James rolled his neck and felt the familiar calm settling over him, the focused awareness that had kept him alive in combat. Whatever these men wanted, they had picked the wrong person on the wrong night. He pushed the door open and stepped outside, alert and ready for whatever came next. The night air felt suddenly cooler as James stepped out of the convenience store. Under the harsh fluorescent lights of the gas station, he could now clearly see the 3 bikers who had been watching him. The largest one, a heavy-set man with a thick beard and arms covered in faded tattoos, nudged his companions when James appeared. They exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them that James recognized all too well from his days in combat, the look of predators selecting their prey. James took a casual sip from his water bottle, his posture relaxed, but his mind racing through scenarios and escape routes. He'd dealt with enough confrontations in his life to know when one was brewing. These men weren't just hanging around, they were hunting. The bearded man spat on the ground and adjusted his leather vest, revealing a gleaming belt buckle shaped like a skull. His two companions wore similar vests with patches that James couldn't quite make out in the dim light. One was tall and lanky with a shaved head, while the other was shorter with a wiry build and nervous energy that made him repeatedly clench and unclench his fists. As James walked toward his car, the three men spread out in a triangle formation that was too deliberate to be coincidental. The bearded leader positioned himself directly between James and his vehicle, while the other two moved to cut off any path back to the store or toward the street. It was a classic ambush technique, and James felt a grim recognition of their tactics. "Nice night for a drive, ain't it?" the bearded man called out, his voice gruff and tinged with mock friendliness. His right hand rested near his waistband in a way that suggested he might be carrying. James stopped at a safe distance, still appearing casual to anyone who might be watching from the store. "Sure is," he replied evenly, making direct eye contact with the leader. He'd learned long ago that showing fear often escalated situations like this. The tall one with the shaved head circled slightly to James's left. "That's a nice watch you got there. Military issue." His tone made it clear it wasn't really a question. James glanced down at his wrist. The simple black tactical watch had been with him through 3 tours. It wasn't particularly valuable, but it clearly wasn't what these men were really interested in. "Just a regular watch," James said, still maintaining his calm demeanor while calculating the distance between himself and each man. The leader was about 6 feet away, the tall one had moved to about 8 feet to his left, and the nervous one was hanging back about 10 feet to his right. The nervous one fidgeted with something in his pocket, and James caught the glint of metal, possibly a knife or brass knuckles. His heart rate remained steady, his breathing controlled. This wasn't his first dangerous encounter, and his body remembered the training that had been drilled into him for years. "Maybe you could let us take a closer look at it," the bearded leader said, taking a step forward. "Along with whatever else you got in those pockets." A car passed by on the main road, its headlights briefly illuminating the scene before continuing on. The teenage boy who had been at another pump had finished and driven away. The elderly couple had left while James was in the store. The only potential witness was the cashier, but she was engrossed in her magazine, probably unable to see this corner of the lot from her position. James noticed all of this in seconds, the situational awareness that had kept him alive in war zones now serving him at this gas station in the suburbs. He knew he was on his own. "Look, fellas," James said, shifting his weight slightly to the balls of his feet. "I don't want any trouble tonight." The 3 men exchanged amused looks. The bearded leader chuckled, a sound devoid of humor. "Well, that's too bad. Trouble seems to have found you anyway." He took another step forward. "Empty your pockets, phone, wallet, keys, all of it. Do it nice and quiet, and maybe we let you walk away." James felt a familiar calm settling over him, not fear, but focus. Time seemed to slow as he observed every detail. The leader's stance was slightly off balance, favoring his right leg. The tall one kept glancing toward the street, suggesting he was the lookout. The nervous one had now pulled out what was definitely a switchblade, the metal catching the light as he flicked it open. "I'm going to ask you once," James said, his voice dropping lower, "to walk away now." His tone carried the weight of someone who had given such warnings before, someone who knew exactly what would happen if they weren't heeded. The bearded leader's smirk faded, replaced by a flash of uncertainty as he registered something in James's eyes, a steady, unflinching gaze that didn't belong to an easy target. But it was too late for second thoughts. The leader nodded to his companions, and they began to close in. The air seemed to grow thick with tension as the 3 bikers moved closer to James. The gas station's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the pavement. In the distance, the sound of traffic on the main road continued, oblivious to the confrontation unfolding in this corner of the lot. "I don't think you understand the situation here," the bearded leader said, his voice dropping to a threatening growl. "This isn't a negotiation." He reached inside his vest, and James caught a glimpse of something metallic, possibly a gun or another knife. The nervous one with the switchblade was bouncing slightly on his toes now, eager for action. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered, the blade dancing in his twitchy grip. James remained still, his breathing steady and controlled. Years of training had taught him how to remain calm in moments exactly like this. His mind wasn't clouded by fear, Instead, it was crystal clear, processing every detail and every possible move. "Your watch, wallet, phone, and car keys," the leader demanded, holding out his hand. "Now." James noticed a small tattoo on the man's wrist as he extended his arm, military-style numbers and letters. This man had served too, which explained the organized approach to their ambush. That knowledge changed things slightly. Perhaps there was still a way to de-escalate. "I'm his army," James said calmly. "Rangers. 3 tours in Afghanistan. I'm guessing you served too." He nodded toward the man's wrist. Something flickered in the leader's eyes, surprise, maybe even a hint of recognition. For a moment, the shared experience of military service seemed to create a brief connection, but it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. "Don't care if you were a Navy SEAL," the leader spat. "Tonight, you're just a guy who's about to get hurt unless you hand over your stuff." The tall one with the shaved head had edged closer on James's left. "Boss doesn't like waiting," he warned, pulling out a set of brass knuckles that gleamed dully in the artificial light. James took a deep breath. He'd given them an out, and they'd refused it. What happened next would be on them. He subtly shifted his stance, centering his weight and preparing for what was coming. "Last chance," James said quietly. "Walk away." The leader laughed, a harsh sound that echoed across the empty lot. "You threatening us? 3 against 1? He looked at his companions, sharing in their apparent amusement. "You watch too many movies, man." James didn't bother responding. He was done talking. His eyes tracked each man's position, noting the nervous one's switchblade, the tall one's brass knuckles, and whatever weapon the leader was concealing. The odds weren't great, but James had faced worse, much worse. The leader nodded to the tall one, who lunged forward with surprising speed, brass knuckles aimed at James's head in a wide arc. But James was no longer where he had been standing. With a fluid movement that spoke of years of training, he sidestepped the punch and used the tall man's momentum against him, grabbing his extended arm and twisting sharply. The crack of the man's wrist breaking was followed by a howl of pain as the brass knuckles clattered to the pavement. Before the other two could react, James had already shoved the tall one hard into the leader, sending both men stumbling backward. The nervous one with the switchblade hesitated, clearly not expecting such a swift response. His hesitation was his downfall. James closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps and delivered a precise strike to the man's forearm. The knife fell from suddenly numbed fingers, and before the man could recover, James's elbow connected with his temple. The nervous one dropped to the ground, dazed but conscious. The leader had regained his balance and was now reaching inside his vest with determination, his face contorted with rage. James knew he couldn't let him draw whatever weapon he was carrying. In one fluid motion, he stepped forward and delivered a front kick directly to the man's knee. The leader screamed as his leg gave way at an unnatural angle. He collapsed, clutching his shattered knee. The weapon forgotten as pain overwhelmed him. The tall one was trying to get up, cradling his broken wrist. James placed a firm foot on his chest, keeping him pinned to the ground. "Stay down," James commanded, his voice steady and controlled despite the exertion. "It's over." The entire confrontation had lasted less than 20 seconds. 3 trained fighters lay incapacitated around James, who stood in the center, his breathing only slightly elevated. The parking lot was eerily quiet now, save for the groans of pain from the bikers. James pulled out his phone to call 911, keeping a watchful eye on all 3 men. As he waited for the dispatcher to answer, he noticed the cashier finally looking up from her magazine, her mouth open in shock at the scene outside the window. "I need to report an attempted robbery at the gas station on Elm Street," James said when the dispatcher answered. 3 men are injured and will need medical attention." He paused, looking down at the leader who was still clutching his knee. "And please tell the officers that one of them might be armed." Red and blue lights flashed across the gas station as 2 police cars pulled into the lot. James sat on the curb, his adrenaline finally beginning to subside. He watched as paramedics attended to the 3 bikers. The leader was still cursing through gritted teeth as they stabilized his knee. The tall one with the broken wrist looked shell-shocked, while the nervous one with the likely concussion kept blinking slowly as if trying to piece together what had happened. An older police officer with salt and pepper hair approached James. His nameplate read Officer Wilson. He had the weathered look of someone who'd seen it all in his 20-plus years on the force. "Mind walking me through what happened here?" Wilson asked, notepad in hand. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't exactly friendly either. James stood up, wincing slightly. Though he'd avoided any serious injuries, his body was beginning to feel the impact of the brief but intense fight. "I stopped for gas," he began, keeping his voice steady. "Those three surrounded me while I was walking back from the store. They demanded my wallet, phone, watch, and keys." Wilson nodded, jotting notes. "And then?" "I asked them to leave. Twice." James gestured toward the security camera mounted on the corner of the building. "It should all be on camera. When they refused and came at me, I defended myself." The officer looked at the three injured men, then back at James, skepticism evident in his expression. "You took down 3 armed men by yourself." Before James could answer, a younger officer jogged over from the convenience store. "Just saw the security footage," he said to Wilson. "It's exactly like he said. They surrounded him, pulled weapons, and he defended himself. The whole thing was over in seconds." The younger officer couldn't hide the impressed look he gave James. Wilson's demeanor shifted slightly. "Military." "Army Rangers," James replied. 3 tours. Understanding dawned on Wilson's face. "That explains it." He closed his notepad. "We'll still need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement, but from what we can see, this was clearly self-defense." As they talked, one of the paramedics approached. "We found this on the leader," she said, handing something to Wilson. It was a small handgun. He also had 3 wallets in his pocket with different IDs, none matching his face. Wilson turned the gun over in his gloved hands. "Serial numbers filed off," he muttered. "Looks like our bikers here have quite a history." He looked at James with newfound respect. "You might have stopped more than just a robbery tonight." The paramedics loaded the leader into an ambulance. His face was a mask of pain and fury as he caught James's eye one last time before the doors closed. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of the police tape. Among them was the cashier, who was animatedly telling everyone how she'd witnessed the whole thing. It was like watching one of those action movies, James overheard her saying, "But real. He moved so fast I could barely see what happened." The young officer brought James a bottle of water. "We checked the database. These guys are wanted in connection with a string of armed robberies across 3 counties. They usually target people at gas stations and ATMs." James took a sip of water, his throat suddenly dry. The reality of what could have happened hit him. If he hadn't had his training, if he'd been someone else. "You okay?" Wilson asked, noticing James's distant look. "Yeah," James replied. "Just processing." Wilson nodded understandingly. "Combat instincts kicked in, huh?" "Something like that." James didn't mention the flashbacks that had briefly overlapped with reality during the confrontation, the sound of gunfire he'd heard that wasn't really there, the momentary disorientation when the parking lot had seemed to transform into a dusty street in Kandahar. A detective arrived and began talking with the officers. James sat back down on the curb, his body suddenly feeling heavy with exhaustion. His phone buzzed with a text from his roommate asking where he was. James stared at the screen, unsure how to explain what had just happened. The night air had grown cooler, and James pulled his jacket tighter around himself. Tomorrow there would be questions, statements to sign, possibly even news coverage if the station's security footage got out. But for now, as he watched the remaining ambulance pull away with its lights flashing, James felt a strange mix of emotions: relief at having survived, sadness at having to use his combat skills in civilian life, and a lingering uncertainty about the line between his military past and his present life. "We're ready for you now," the detective called, motioning James toward his car. "Let's get you a statement and then get you home." James nodded and stood up. Home. After everything that had happened in the last hour, that single word carried more weight than he'd expected. The police station hummed with late-night activity as James finished giving his statement. It was nearly midnight by the time Detective Reynolds closed his notebook and offered a firm handshake. "That's all we need for now," Reynolds said. "The security footage backs up everything you've told us. Those 3 have been hitting gas stations across the county for weeks." James nodded, exhaustion settling into his bones. The fluorescent lights of the interview room made his eyes ache after the long day. "What happens now?" "Now you go home and get some rest," Reynolds replied, leading him toward the exit. "The district attorney will review the case, but it's pretty clear-cut self-defense. Those guys chose the wrong person to target tonight." As they walked through the station, James noticed several officers glancing his way. News traveled fast in a police department. He wasn't sure if their looks were of admiration or concern, maybe both. Outside, the night air felt cool against his face. James's roommate Tom was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his truck. When James had called asking for a ride, Tom hadn't asked questions, one of the many reasons they'd become friends after meeting at a veterans support group last year. "You look like hell," Tom said as James approached. His tone was light, but concern showed in his eyes. Tom had served in the Marines and understood what it meant when old instincts resurfaced. "Feel like it too," James admitted, climbing into the passenger seat. As they pulled away from the station, he filled Tom in on the details, his voice mechanical as he recounted the events at the gas station. Tom whistled low. "3 guys? Armed?" He shook his head. "Man, some people never learn not to judge a book by its cover." James stared out the window at the empty streets. It wasn't a fair fight. "For them, you mean?" Tom said with a short laugh. "No," James replied quietly. "For anyone. They had no idea what they were walking into." He flexed his hand, feeling the soreness in his knuckles. "Neither did I." The truck fell silent as Tom drove. He knew when to push and when to let things be. Tonight was definitely a time for the latter. When they reached their apartment complex, James paused before getting out of the truck. "I need to take a walk," he said suddenly. "Clear my head." Tom studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Want company?" "No, I'm good. Thanks for the ride." The neighborhood was quiet as James walked slowly along the sidewalk. Streetlights cast pools of yellow light every few yards, and somewhere a dog barked half-heartedly at his passing. His mind replayed the fight in fragments, the sound of the tall man's wrist breaking, the look of shock on the leader's face when his knee gave way. He'd been trained to neutralize threats efficiently, and tonight that training had worked perfectly. Yet there was no satisfaction in it, only a hollowed feeling and the unwelcome familiarity of adrenaline still fading from his system. His phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen, his VA therapist. "Heard what happened. Office open early tomorrow if you need to talk." News really did travel fast. James typed back a quick thanks and put the phone away. He'd definitely be taking the doctor up on that offer. A car slowed beside him, and James tensed automatically before recognizing Officer Wilson from the gas station. The window rolled down. "Thought that was you," Wilson said. "Little late for a stroll, isn't it?" James nodded. "Just walking off some energy." Wilson seemed to understand. Combat high. Takes a while to come down. He'd clearly recognized the signs of a fellow veteran. "Need a lift home?" "I'm good, thanks though." Wilson hesitated. "Look, for what it's worth, I've seen the aftermath of what those 3 did to other people. You stopped them before they could hurt anyone else." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it over. "My brother runs a boxing gym that works with vets. Might be a good place to channel some of that training in a positive way." James took the card, surprised by the gesture. "I'll think about it." "Do that." Wilson nodded. "And get some rest. The press will probably be calling you tomorrow once they get wind of this." As the patrol car pulled away, James continued walking, turning the card over in his fingers. The thought of cameras and reporters made his stomach tighten. He'd avoided attention since coming home, preferring the quieter life he built. He found himself at a small park and sat heavily on a bench. The night was peaceful now, stars visible through breaks in the cloud cover. In Afghanistan, he'd often looked at these same stars during night watch, finding comfort in their constant presence. James took a deep breath, then another, using the grounding techniques Dr. Chen had taught him. The park bench beneath him, the cool air on his skin, the distant sound of traffic, this moment here and now. Tomorrow would bring questions and attention he didn't want. But tonight, in this quiet moment alone, James allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened and what could have happened at that gas station. Morning light filtered through the blinds as James stared at his phone. 17 missed calls, dozens of text messages, and countless social media notifications lit up his screen. The security footage had leaked overnight, probably from someone at the gas station, and now the video was everywhere. Local news stations were calling it gas station justice. Others had less flattering headlines. He scrolled through messages from old army buddies who'd recognized him in the grainy footage. Even his mother had called from 3 states away after a neighbor showed her the video. Tom knocked lightly on his bedroom door. "You alive in there?" James sighed and opened the door. Tom held up his laptop, showing a news website with the security footage playing on repeat. The video showed the entire confrontation from a high angle, the bikers surrounding him, the failed intimidation, and then James's lightning-fast response. "You're trending, man," Tom said, shaking his head. "They're calling you the Ranger online." James rubbed his eyes. "Great, just what I need." "Channel 7 is outside the building," Tom added. "Some reporter with perfect hair." "I told them you weren't home." "Thanks." James checked his watch. His appointment with Dr. Chen was in an hour. "I need to head out the back way." 20 minutes later, James slipped through the complex's rear exit and took a circuitous route to the VA center. The morning was bright and clear, a stark contrast to his mood. Every passing car made him wonder if someone was recognizing him from the video. Dr. Chen was waiting in her office, a cup of tea already prepared for him. She was in her 50s with short, gray-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. In the 2 years she'd been his therapist, she'd helped him navigate the difficult transition from military to civilian life. "I've seen the video," she said as he sat down. "How are you holding up?" James wrapped his hands around the warm cup. "Honestly, not great. I didn't want any of this attention. It brings you back to the spotlight," Dr. Chen observed. She knew how much James had struggled with the recognition he'd received during his service, the medals, the commendations that had felt hollow compared to the friends he'd lost. "I just wanted to get gas and go home," he said, frustration edging into his voice. "Now I'm some kind of viral sensation, people commenting on my technique like it's a sporting event. They don't understand what it means to have to use those skills." Dr. Chen nodded. "The disconnect between civilian perceptions of combat training and the reality of it is something we've discussed before. It's not entertainment," James said quietly. "Those men could have died." "I could have died." "But you didn't," she reminded him. "And your training protected you." They talked for nearly an hour, working through the complex emotions the incident had triggered. By the end, James felt more centered, though the prospect of dealing with his newfound publicity still loomed large. As he was leaving, Dr. Chen handed him a business card. "A colleague of mine works with a nonprofit that helps veterans share their experiences in schools. It might be a positive way to channel some of this attention." Outside the VA center, James paused to check his phone again. 5 more missed calls, including one from Detective Reynolds. He returned that call immediately. "The DA has officially ruled it self-defense," Reynolds informed him. "No charges will be filed against you." The 3 suspects, however, are looking at multiple counts of attempted armed robbery, plus charges for prior incidents. "That's good news," James replied, relief evident in his voice. "There's something else," Reynolds added. "The leader, guy named Harkins, wants to speak with you." James stopped walking. "Why would I want to talk to him?" "He wouldn't say, just that he needed to tell you something important." Reynolds paused. "You don't have to do it. Completely up to you." James thought about the bearded man with the military tattoo on his wrist. What could he possibly have to say? "I'll think about it," James said finally. He ended the call and continued walking, deep in thought. The sun was high now, warming the back of his neck. A group of kids played basketball in a park across the street, their shouts and laughter carrying on the breeze. Something about their carefree energy made James pause. Before Afghanistan, before the Rangers, he'd been like them, unaware of how quickly life could change, how violence could erupt in ordinary places like gas stations on quiet evenings. His phone buzzed again, Tom warning him that reporters had figured out where he worked and were waiting at the Veterans Center where he volunteered. James changed direction, heading instead toward the address on the card Officer Wilson had given him. Maybe a boxing gym was exactly what he needed today, somewhere to work through his thoughts with his body when his mind felt too full. As he walked, he couldn't shake the question that had kept him awake most of the night. What would he say if he agreed to meet the man who had tried to rob him? 3 days later, James sat in a small room at the county jail waiting. The decision to meet with Harkins hadn't come easily. Tom thought he was crazy for even considering it. Dr. Chen had been more measured, suggesting that closure might come from understanding the man's motivations. The door buzzed, and 2 guards led in the bearded biker leader. Harkins looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, less threatening. His face was bruised, and he walked with a pronounced limp, his knee heavily bandaged. The guards helped him into the chair across from James and stepped back, remaining alert but giving them a semblance of privacy. For a long moment, the 2 men just looked at each other. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. "Didn't think you'd come," Harkins finally said, his voice rougher than James remembered. "Almost didn't," James replied evenly. "What's so important you needed to tell me in person?" Harkins shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "First off, I'm not asking for forgiveness or nothing like that. What happened, happened." James waited silently. "That tattoo you noticed," Harkins continued, gesturing to his wrist. 75th Rangers, 2008 to 2013. Afghanistan mostly. James felt a chill run down his spine. He'd been right. The men had served in the same unit, though their paths had never crossed. "After my 3rd tour, I came back. Different," Harkins said, his eyes fixed on the table between them. "Started drinking. Lost my job, my house, my family. The VA doctors called it PTSD with a side of traumatic brain injury." James recognized the story all too well. He'd seen too many good soldiers follow similar paths after coming home. Met some guys who understood. Found a new brotherhood with the bikers, Harkins continued. Started small, stealing to eat, then stealing to pay for pills. Then it just became who I was. His voice faltered. "Whom I am." "Why are you telling me this?" James asked, unsure where this was heading. Harkins looked up, meeting James's eyes directly for the first time. "Because you could have been me. And I could have been you. Same unit, same war, different paths home." The words hung in the air between them, uncomfortably true. "When I saw how you moved that night," Harkins said, "I knew exactly who I was dealing with, but it was too late." He gave a bitter laugh. "Guess I forgot what Rangers are capable of." James thought about all the times he'd nearly slipped off his own path, the nightmares, the anger, the isolation. The thin line between holding it together and falling apart. "The other reason I wanted to see you," Harkins continued, "was to warn you. The video of what happened is everywhere. My crew has friends who might not take kindly to seeing 3 of their own taken down like that." James tensed. "Is that a threat?" "No," Harkins shook his head emphatically. "It's a warning from one ranger to another. Watch your back. Not everyone who comes looking for you will announce themselves like we did." One of the guards stepped forward. 2 minutes left. Harkins leaned forward. "You've got something I lost somewhere along the way. A purpose. Don't lose it." As the guards helped Harkins to his feet, he turned back to James. "One last thing. Those kids at the Veterans Center you volunteer at, keep doing that. That might have been what saved you from becoming me." James left the jail with his mind racing. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He'd expected to feel anger sitting across from Harkins, but instead found only a complicated mixture of pity and the uncomfortable recognition of how easily their roles could have been reversed. His phone buzzed with a message from Tom. "News crews finally gave up. Coast is clear at home." Another text followed immediately. "P.S. That boxing gym called. They want to know if you're interested in teaching a self-defense class for veterans." James stopped walking and stared at the message. He thought about his conversation with Harkins, about parts taken and not taken, about purpose. He dialed the gym's number as he walked. When someone answered, James took a deep breath. "Hi, this is James. Officer Wilson gave me your card about the Veterans Program." He paused, watching the last light of day fade from the sky. "I'd like to help if I can." That night, James sat on his balcony looking at the same stars he'd watched in Afghanistan, the same stars he'd seen from the park bench after the fight. The same stars Harkins had likely looked up at during his own watches. Different paths, same stars. The viral video would eventually fade from public interest. The reporters would move on to the next sensation, but the connection between his past and present, between war and peace, between who he was and who he might have become, that would remain. James pulled out his phone and opened his messages. He typed a quick text to his VA group, coming to the meeting tomorrow. Got a lot to talk about. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, he would start sharing his story.